Super. Yeah. So yeah, well, I guess we'll kick things off.
We're officially live.
We're officially live. Great. How good. So how's everybody online? I think we've got a lot of people online, which is amazing. So yeah, I just did the introductions for everybody, and we're about to get started with the panel discussion. So I'll grab you to turn on the microphone, Ryan, when you're ready. And I'm going to just sort of ask a little bit about research holistically to start out with. And maybe I'll start with you, Eniola, actually, about your kind of background in research. I mean, I think some of the sort of stuff that you've seen over the years in research, which you think will maybe stay the same with AI. Some of the kind of constants, if you will.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Eniola. I'm a UX researcher. So excited to be here. So I got my start. My background is actually in biology. I studied integrative biology at Cal. Go there.
Yeah, bits.
And so my first job out of school was at a market research and user research firm that worked with pharma tech companies. And so I got my start in UX research, talking to patients and doctors and caregivers about different therapy areas, right? Cancer, TBI, a bunch of different really heavy conversations, right? So my start was really around building rapport with users and really holding space for them to share their stories about how these diseases and how these medications and like interventions actually really impacted their lives. And then from there, I switched into fintech. Right. And so people were like, hold on, you studied bio, like, what are you doing at SVB? And what are you doing in the design kind of tech space altogether? But I said, like, you know, talking about money and talking about healthcare, like they're both really sensitive topics that you don't usually talk to strangers about. And so holding that rapport and having those real conversations and like people sharing their stories about what they needed and what they wanted, that's what like really captures me. And that's what I do today. Like, those moments where I go on research trips and I'm like actually talking to people and having real conversations, like that's what does it for me. And like, yeah,
let's dive into that a little bit, because we were chatting just before about how in-person research is coming back after COVID. Like we kind of had a lot of switching obviously over to video calling and digital research. You have the benefit or luxury of going on field trips and doing a bit of sort of ethnography. Do you want to tell us a little bit about one of those?
Yeah, sure. So I just got back from the Philippines and I was talking to some users out there, both businesses and consumers, about different products and how they use Facebook and how they use Instagram. And really, like, obviously I don't speak the local language, right? So I wasn't the one actually moderating, but getting a chance to be in the back room and do iterations around, okay, this is what we're hearing, like, let's strategize live and let's get together with the moderator and the research team that's in the background and like develop these personas live and like understanding the different spectrums that users sit on. Like, it was really, the hope that we went into the research with was like, there were really high hopes, right? We wanted to come out with different value propositions and things like that. And we got them. And it was awesome to like sit there and like be in the strategy of this is what we're hearing from users and these are the applications and these are the use cases. And I just think being able to bring my, you know, product partners along, and also people get a little bit more excited about research when it's like in person and they get to like hear from users. Just like the impact that you can bring back to the company when you do go in and talk to users and like you get outside of just the screen on, you know, the virtual sessions is huge.
Yeah, and that's obviously emotions play a huge part in this. And I'm sure we were chatting previously a bit about how emotions are so important in research and how that's such a fundamental part of the human, you know, part of it. Sri, like, you know, one of the things that probably won't change with AI is that about building empathy, and how do you kind of think about that as it relates to technology and research?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Sri. I'm at Circle, thinking about research in a crypto space, which is interesting and fascinating and scary. Going back to your question, Benjamin, you know, we were chatting about synthetic users and, you know, does it ever replace talking to real users and whatnot? My perspective has always been, if you're not talking to real people, you can build real products in a way that will benefit them. So I'm on the other side of maybe it won't happen, maybe it shouldn't happen, which is, you know, different debate and discussion. But whenever, I did research, one of the things that I've been always looking for is the emotion, right? How are decisions being made that are, driven by emotions and subconsciously or consciously, right? I've done research all the way from, packaging in a retail store, and why would somebody pick a cereal box over another one when they had so many different options? And, if you try to rationalize the decision, people can't explain, right? So much of what we do as people, be it a piece of software or, any of the selection or decisions that we're making is so much rooted in our experiences, both past, present, and, what we're going to do with them in the future. So for me, having an AI or just a mechanism or an automated system that cannot understand the context in a way that we as researchers understand can truly do justice to research and, what we bring back to the table and how we build that empathy within the organization from the observations made in the field. So that's where I stand with it. Hopefully, AI, I don't know, may become like humans one day. There's a lot of conversations about that, but I highly doubt it. I think we overestimate sometimes. And we're just talking about that, how long does it take? Would it even happen or not? But for now, I'm a big proponent of going out, making sure emotions are part of the understanding and bringing it back to the organization. So we build that empathy.
Yeah, totally. Because it's all about, especially as I suppose it relates to stakeholder buy-in and getting, influencing, right, with research. A lot of it is about that emotional kind of, feeling that a stakeholder gets when they see somebody interacting with the product and the usability test or something like this. Behzod, I'm interested in, you touched on the synthetic users a little bit. Large language models today, they kind of are just the mean, I suppose, of the internet, right? As a representation, they are kind of by definition the average sort of virtual person. How do you think LLMs like ChatGPT can be used in research today, or is it just too early? And I suppose, is there a place right now for this kind of idea of a virtual end user?
Let me answer that. I think the first question you asked earlier about what isn't going to change, I think relates to this, because I work with a lot of very early stage companies, 5 to 6 people that are talking to customers for the first time. I spent the early part of my career at Facebook as we scaled from 3 to 30,000 people. And I think the thing that was consistent, whether you're a 5-person company or a 30,000 person company, is you're trying to design with the people that you're trying to serve, not just for them. And so being very close to them, I think Shree's point out, understanding their behavior, whether it's through field work, like Eniola mentioned, or seeing it on their faces, that matters. So I haven't been terribly excited about the stuff that I've seen around synthetic users, because I think if it's the aggregate of a bunch of behaviors, we probably are all pretty rational people and could guess what the average person is doing and then test for a lot of those things. The place that I've gotten more excited with some of the LLMs that I've gotten to play with is around, I think about it a lot, is when I was a graduate student, I had a lot of undergrads. Can I, if there are known tasks or known activities, can I give this system a task where I can actually trace the work itself? So here's a text. Can you summarize the things that are in the text? And then I can actually go back and why do you believe that this is a summary? Or if here's an interview transcript, I've done this a lot with Grain, where I'm an investor. They have summaries, and their summaries, I think similar to the Dovetail kind of tagging, is actually tied to the clip, right? So it's the customer expressed positive sentiment. It's great, prove it. And I think we're at that stage where it's easy to use it as augmentation and to do a lot of the tasks that we know how to do. I've replaced a lot of the R code that I used to write with LLMs, because I can use natural language to say, what were the responses here? Or how often were things like meetings mentioned in this body of text, where the writing the R script for that is just kind of uncomfortable. But I don't think that there's a super exciting path for me in terms of the synthetic side of things, because you can kind of squint at that and be, reasonably good at guessing what's going to happen.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the things that the LLMs have had to most negative feedback on, is that it is this very high level kind of generic sort of summary style response, summary on summary on summary, right? Which kind of makes sense. But you touched on some of the things that AI can maybe do for researchers today. And it sounds kind of similar to, I guess, how it might help engineers write code with, like GitHub Copilot, where it is, obviously in the branding, it's Copilot. It's not going to write the code for you. Automation, Ryan, is obviously a massive part of Zapier. I'm interested in how you guys are sort of thinking about AI and maybe how it can help people automate parts of their job.
Yeah, I should also say, in terms of research, I'm not a researcher, so sorry, but I'm a consumer of research. And there's 2 researchers on my team who support the go-to-market org at Zapier. Yeah, I mean, in terms of automation, I think the most interesting parts around that, this isn't novel or anything, but I think it's the idea of taking unstructured data and moving it somewhere that's structured. Maybe that's an insight, maybe that's something else, but the socialization aspect is probably the most compelling part, because that's how I use it personally, at least, is like incredible summarization, can keep fine tuning it, keep asking it things, get it into a place where you can analyze it better or take action on it or socialize it. That's super compelling. I mean, I think that's pretty awesome, and do it automatically. I think the other part that's interesting, we deal with this all the time at Zapier, where we have research, and then it's like, how are we going to get this to people? It's kind of like the socialization is half the battle, maybe more than half the battle. And that's like a push model. And I think with automation, there's opportunities for it to be more of a like pull. And we have this unique thing in Zapier right now where, like, obviously everyone's AI obsessed. So there's this real captive audience. So there's a lot of hovering, and everyone's like on the same playing field right now, which is really cool. I mean, I think with AI, there's like, our CEO will say this, there's never been a smaller gap between like an expert and like a novice user. So a lot of people are hovering right now. And so getting back to automation, it's like you can get information, and I think the cool part will be if they can pull it out more easily. That'll be exciting.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I think like with us in particular, I suppose the classification of the data seems like that's going to be the thing in the next few years. It'll become a lot easier to do with AI, right? Like the actual tagging and the thematic classification. But it still leaves the same challenge that researchers have, which is influencing stakeholders and getting decision makers kind of bought in. Eniola, I'd love to hear a little more from you about shifting out of AI for a second, around how you've succeeded at doing that, and what are some of the things that you've done to get stakeholder buy-in in your career as a researcher?
Yeah, so I think over the course of my career, so it's been almost 10 years now, like UX has become a lot more well-known, right? 10 years ago, people didn't really know what user research was, or they just called it something different. And so people have really understood that now that there's more innovation, experiences really matter, because that's what differentiates different products from each other. And so they really bought into, okay, we need to understand from the user and build with our users, like you mentioned. And so people understand like accessibility is really important, inclusivity is really important. So that's been a huge shift that we've seen. And so with hearing like things like synthetic users, right? My main question for the people that are building this is, how are we going to make sure that we're still understanding the stories of the people at the margins, right? Or how are we getting new information and not just the information that's already out there, or that we know already, or that we ourselves have put out on the internet, right? The other thing is, like, when you think about attitudinal versus behavioral research, a lot of the juicy insights come from this behavioral research of watching people use stuff, or going to their environment and like doing ethnographic research. And so obviously there's a limitation there with AI or with synthetic users.
I read an article recently that was circulating around that sort of said that UX researchers have sort of missed their shot the last 10 years to really get that seat at the table in the same way that designers have. I'm curious, maybe Behzod, we'll go back to you, sort of, when we think about influencing stakeholders and getting really deep buy-in to the value of research, do you agree with that idea that actually, all hope is lost, or are there still, and what's kind of changed, I guess, in the last 10 years too? Like what in terms of the practices, behaviors, collaboration tools, and things like this make it easier to get buy-in or harder?
I don't think all hope is lost, but I probably have less palatable takes than most on this. I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle to realize is that research practices start as soon as a company does. Like the founder is the first researcher. And I think a lot of people come into a company and they think, oh, we hired a researcher, therefore there's research practice. But research has been happening all the way, right? Like a lot of the teams I work with don't hire researchers for 50 people, but they're still doing research. And many of them have very robust research practices because they care about designing with the people they're using to, like, they want to spend time in those environments. I think a lot of people in the last decade don't necessarily have the context that having a researcher that was like dedicated to a company was a privilege and a team was a luxury. And we've operated in this environment where we expect there to be research teams. And so I think a lot of the folks that I've worked with that are earlier in their career are unfortunately used to doing something that looks a lot more like playing telephone, where they go and they spend time with customers and they bring that back to the team and they're like, look, this is what they said. And I made that mistake a ton when I was really early in my career and didn't realize that like my job wasn't to do research necessarily. Like I'm not there to do the activity. I think about this, like I wasn't there to be like an oracle that just understood things about the customer. Like my job was to be more like a teacher, either to help people understand what they were hearing or make sense of things. And that a lot of like our job is actually, to your point, to help people make better decisions. And so one of the mistakes I made a ton when I was getting started was like, I would do exactly what the product managers asked. They'd be like, oh, can you go watch people use this product? I'm like, of course. Yeah. Like I'm super capable. We're going to go do that. Go do the study. And like, we don't learn anything because the reality was that they were trying to decide how do we better serve this customer? And I should have stopped and asked, like, what was it that you need to see to make that decision really well? And then can I actually go and gather that evidence to make that decision or not? And I think this is it's very easy. We see this in experimentation too, where people are like, well, experiments are about testing hypotheses. It's like, you have millions of hypotheses. Like, how do you think about which hypotheses you're going to test? It's like, what's the decision that you're actually trying to make as a business? And can you use that to orient the work? So I think that the thing that I worry about with the field is so many of us are focused on fighting for the ability to do research, like to talk to customers, to like be the person in the room, instead of thinking more about how a lot of our special skills are, you know, that we are rigorous in our curiosity and we have these like expertise on how we frame questions and like think about the why behind the work. And I think if we fought more to like make sure that good work was being done rather than being the ones who did the work, we would probably be more successful.
So like shifting more into a facilitation or enablement focus, right? Do you think that obviously as AI, I suppose over the next 5 years or 10 years will no doubt become better and more sophisticated, and the actual execution element of research will start to fall to the side a bit more? How does that change the role of a researcher?
I think we do become more like facilitators or teachers. And I'm definitely biased in this, both because I do a lot of consulting now, but even when I was leading research ops at Slack, we had a 200+ person customer success team that would send surveys out to customers, like in order to roll out Slack at their company. And there was no way that we were going to hire enough researchers to send out those surveys or analyze them. So we had to say, like, this is a core part of your job. We have survey expertise and we can make the questions you're asking better. We can standardize how you're analyzing those. And we were able to roll out Qualtrics to the entire customer success team. And then we never had to look at those surveys again because we templatized them. And so it was like, you're going to ask these standard questions at a regular interval, and we feel totally safe with that work happening. And we were able to partner. And I think that there's a lot of, like, I have folks I work with now where I encourage them to use ChatGPT to write survey questions, not because they're ever going to send those, but because it helps them go from a blank page to a set of things that they can then start to interrogate, and we can have a more substantial conversation about.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sparring partner, I suppose.
Exactly.
Right. Well, that leads me to another question I have, which maybe I'll jump over to Sri. You know, the landscape of AI tools right now, what can researchers really make use of at the moment, I suppose, to have an advantage?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question that I've been reflecting a lot as I'm setting up team at Circle. One of the things early on in my career is I used to work for a consulting company, and researchers were always paired, right? So you would have a researcher that's moderating, And then you would have another researcher who's probably a little bit more junior. That's part of the program, but really note taking and so on and so forth. I think along the way, one of the things that I've noticed is for lack of a better term, the assistant model is lost. The researcher is expected to do it all, moderating, taking notes. I mean, it just becomes way too much. And when you bring all the data back, you're all by yourself. So I think one of the interesting applications of AI could be is an opportunity for AI to play that assistant role that can help you scale as a researcher. Now, what would it exactly translate to from a database? We can debate it, but I think there's this unique value in using AI in that capacity, at different steps within the research process. The other thing I generally believe, and one of the biggest asks that I get always from my XFN partners is speed and agility. I think there's, if you put those two things on, two axes where scale and agility, and then I think there's a real overlap between where those two things can come together and can help researcher really shine in very complex orgs that we have today.
And you're building the research team at Circle and hiring at the moment. I'm interested in maybe what sort of like attributes you're looking for at the moment in terms of hiring a researcher, and what makes a researcher very successful to you in 2023?
Yeah, the top thing for me, again, there's factors that go into this, right? Which is the space, what it is right now. There's a lot of external factors that are influencing on how we think about research, and the research in crypto is there's not many researchers that are doing it. So it's not like, you can take off the shelf methodology or things that I've worked in and utilize it. So putting that all of that in perspective, one word that comes to my mind is flexibility. Nobody expected about SVB. I mean, what's going to happen in the dependency there, right? Like, I think there's going to be many more events like that in this space, and with regulation of what it is in US and how other geopolitical players are playing this, research has a key role in defining, both use cases, but also what is the value that we're going to deliver, right? Because the space in general is moving from speculative value to utility, which means there's going to be a lot of mass adoption. And, how do we think about that, right? How do we create value through design and experiences and other means?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, maybe I'd love to hear a little bit about how you work at Meta in terms of how researchers sort of think about, I guess, adding value to business goals and to decision-making process, and whether there are maybe established cultural norms that you could share in terms of how insights are shared through your team or the company. Sort of interested in that, because I imagine the practice is fairly established, right? It's fairly mature.
A little bit. So I'll just rewind to the beginning of my career. I started agency side. And shout out to anyone who has done research on the agency side, because it is not glamorous and it's very grueling, but it's like a crash course. You learn so much. You work with, I got a chance to work with so many companies, so many different methods. And so obviously on the agency side, I was taking the questions that they had. I was going out and I was answering them, and I was delivering insights that were actionable for the team. And then that was it. Right. So then fast forward to now, and even before now, but now that I'm on a research team and at Meta, UX researchers really develop and hold the strategy of how are we building knowledge about our users, and then how can we take that knowledge and apply it to what we're building, right? So really partnering with those product teams and leading the strategy of here's what we should learn next, or here's what the knowledge gaps are. And I know you want to build this thing. So let me, strategize and brainstorm with you what we need to learn in order to build that really well. Right. And then also taking people back to the beginning of hey, do our users need that? Have they expressed that they need that? What has shown us that they need that? And what need are we trying to solve? Right. And it's always interesting when you give that question, right, to a team and you wait for the answer and you can always tell when they've thought about it and when they haven't. So I think that's one of the biggest difference that I have had the, honor of noticing in different teams and different structures. Like you said, it's a really privileged structure to have embedded research, to have researchers that are really carrying the knowledge strategy. And I think that's where a lot of like this generative and like innovation can really come from.
I want to stay on Meta for a little bit and maybe dive into the history of how research got so embedded. It sounds like three of you have worked at Facebook or currently do. Sri, I mean, you were there a few years ago. I'm curious about how did this happen? How did research get such a sort of influence in the sense of the strategy and everything?
That's a loaded question. I can answer the 5 years that I've been in, and things that I've observed at Meta that I've not seen at other companies. I think one is there's a lot of understanding of value of research at a senior leadership level, right? So there's when you go into product reviews, when you go into roadmap reviews, there are these 5 types of questions that leadership asks. What is the problem that we are solving? Why this versus the other problems, right? What gives us the confidence that Meta is uniquely positioned to be able to solve that? And then what does success look like if we solve the problem? And I think even though those are 5 sounds like simple questions in the hindsight, all of the other companies that have been at 15 years prior to that has never asked those questions, right? It's always started from how are we going to make money? And it's pretty fascinating to see a company as Meta that's so profitable, but don't really start with let's make money and build products. I mean, eventually we have to make money, and they have teams that are purely focused on monetization. But starting with user and starting with really senior leadership asking those questions had profound impact on how pods or projects have approached product development. So I think that's one thing, just sitting in those reviews that really stuck with me, providing that ammunition to senior leadership and having them ask those questions.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a sort of culture of research and curiosity at the leadership level. Behzod, you do a lot of consulting with companies, and I imagine part of this is establishing said culture. What are kind of 2 or 3 things that you encourage maybe senior leaders to think about or consider to sort of create that research culture? And then if we can thread the needle back into sort of that pulling push versus pull model, where actually executives can maybe leverage AI and everything and LLMs nowadays to maybe self-service access to insights as well. Is that something that could happen?
Yeah, I think I might even pick up on the Meta thing for a second, because I think one thing that's underappreciated now is actually the governance structure of the company. Like the fact that Mark owns 51% of the company meant that very early on, we had a lot of latitude to do the things that we thought were best, even when the market didn't like it. And I think that created a lot of the space for what Sri and Eniola were talking about in terms of like, we were growing very fast, and we knew that a bunch of privileged people in an air-conditioned building in Menlo Park shouldn't be making decisions for hundreds of millions or billions of people around the world. And so we were given a lot of latitude to go to where people were and understand how they were using the products. And I think that was established very early on. And I think that sort of humility ends up being one of the most important things early on. Imagine for you as a founder, you start by solving a problem that you feel. And then the question becomes, who else has this problem, and how do they experience this problem, and what have they tried, and what's working or what's not working? And I think it becomes really easy as you grow to lose that, because then you shift away from solving problems to selling the best version of the solution, often at the cost of continuing to solve the problem or watching as the problem has changed. And so I think that sort of humility and self-reflection ends up being a very big part of what companies need to pay attention to. I think related to that is, what are the rituals and artifacts that support that, whether it's decision-making or even just how we pay attention to and codify what we believe to be true about the world, whether that's about our products, the business, our customers, and do we start to build a ritual of sharing that across teams? I think one of the failure modes I see with a lot of companies is those truths stay very siloed, and it's easy for one team to operate in one direction, another team to operate in another direction, because they haven't just sat down and said hey, we're trying to solve the same problem, but we're looking at different sides of it. Right? I think one of the things that, going to your question about AI, at Slack, one of the things we did was we had this sort of wiki that lived on top of what would have been effectively our research repository that was like answered these questions of like what we believe to be true. You know, how do people feel about Slack? How does that differ based on tenure or geography or plan type or things like that? And they were these kind of questions that basically if you were new to the company, we wanted you to read through so that you could have the answers and like understand how Slack thought about things. That took the team a ton of time. Like we spent lots of time writing those answers, citing studies, et cetera, like really condensing it down to a one pager that anyone in the company could read and get up to speed. I think AI, a lot of the very narrow tools make that so much faster now, right? You can throw tons of raw studies and summaries there and it's like, great, how has NPS changed or how has customer satisfaction changed quarter over quarter? Something I used to do when I would report on tracking surveys was like issue outages. So I'd make a timeline slide in Google. I'd go through all of the outages that we had at Slack. I'd pull up severity reports. I'd plot them. Like those things you can generate in seconds now. And I think that like, how do we continue to make sure that we're engaging with the world as it is, not just the world that we want it to be? And how do we like support that with our processes has just gotten a lot easier, especially with a lot of the work that y'all do with Zapier.
Yeah. So Ryan, I'm interested, like we just touched on sort of like these AI tools and how they can help us out. ChatGPT is kind of a horizontal tool, right? Like you can sort of use it for so many different use cases and throw all sorts of stuff at it from, you know, generating recipes through to synthesizing data to writing code. That's cool. Do you think that, you know, in the next few years, like how do you think the sort of AI technology is going to manifest itself, I suppose, for specific use cases? Where are we going in terms of sort of startup land and AI and these technologies?
I wish I knew. No, I mean, I think I probably have a couple assumptions. I think one of them is I think it'll be incredibly fragmented, which might mean it might be incredibly niche as well. I think that's really interesting about ChatGPT as an example right now, like the ability to chat, but everyone's going in there and like, how do I use this thing? You know, and people are discovering and posting online all these different ways to prompt it and come up with these use cases and get a response and keep going. I think like that is pretty fascinating, but there's like limitations there where it's not necessarily set up for whatever your specific purpose is. Something interesting that happened at Zapier is we kind of took it and created a little chat bot in our new interfaces product that's in beta right now. But our head of comms took it and basically built a comms library of different chatbots that had their own directives for what they were good at. And it's kind of picked up in the company, which is kind of interesting. But if you want to go write a press release, this is the bot you go use. If you want to go do X, Y, or Z, there's a whole library there. And then they also did one for like manager feedback. And so folks have been going there for a bot that's like set up for that. And that was kind of interesting to just see a library and then see like these niches pop up.
Yeah,
so
it feels like the verticalization is inevitable, right? Like it
I think
has
so.
to, because I mean, the world in which you're sort of like twiddling around with the prompts for hours on end to get it to sort of spit out your specific use case relevant stuff.
Yep.
Feels like very hacky.
Yep. And it takes you a while to figure it out, you know, how to go deeper. And I think you can probably get pretty fed up pretty quickly where you're like, oh, this is mildly useful.
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges we have, we've incorporated a few AI things into Dovetail recently. And one of the interesting things is just the inconsistency. Like we have a new summarization feature. It's just inconsistent. Like the model would just kind of do what it wants. And you're like, one of the funniest things is that, you know, we kind of default to bullet points as the summary. And then sometimes you get bullet points with hyphens inside the bullet points because it decided on that day, you know, that it wants to use hyphens. You're like, what's going on? And so that lack of kind of continuity or stability or even the ability to kind of test it and everything and have any sort of rigor around it seems like a massive problem as it relates to, you know, fact checking, stability across days, model getting updated and stuff. But yeah, I think obviously the verticalization is a huge thing that's going to happen, right? Like I was talking to somebody the other day about like a law kind of legal focused AI startup and how they're kind of helping out with, you know, legal review and discovery and so on. Zapier being a horizontal tool, with many different use cases and so on. Like, there are opportunities for you guys to incorporate AI in interesting ways. And I suppose, is it solely focused on LLM type stuff, or is it a bit broader than that?
Yeah, it's extremely horizontal at Zapier. It's so crazy. Sometimes I'll listen to customers, listen to calls, and there's an element where you're like, you want to connect what to what? It's like, it's really kind of mind blowing how wide it is, because Zapier connects almost 6,000 apps. So it's literally like anything at any time, which can be a struggle to figure out, like, what do most people use Zapier for? And the answer is like nothing. All sorts of things. So like for us, I think we think about it on a couple different fields. There is like the ability to just bring in AI apps onto the platform, which you can do today, and start bringing AI into your Zaps and have it solve some sort of problem that might be like automating, a news event happens and automating like a bunch of tweets if you wanted to respond to it, things like that. That's kind of a smaller example, but that's one piece. The other is like, it's pretty old hat to like point and click in an editor and like build a workflow when you could just write it up in natural language now. And so that's pretty compelling for us to look into and start working on. And then there's other elements too of like, as other tools have AI capabilities, that's a ton of new data that's being, a good example is like, there's a video conference software called Vowel. They're Zoom competitor. They have all this amazing AI capability of like taking transcriptions, action items, all that stuff. And they've baked Zapier straight into their interface, and then it automatically sends it to Asana or action items to Asana. And so all of a sudden, tools that weren't AI before have a new set of data that they need to go move somewhere. So that's super interesting for us to like figure out how to help other companies just get good data, and other tools.
Yeah, and I suppose with LLMs, eventually it's going to come to the point where it is all about the data and the model, and those who have that data and can train the models that are bespoke to the use case are going to be the winners at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
One of the things we've been talking about a lot internally at Dovetail is, hey, we have all this customer data, right, about the research, but the problem is that obviously every customer is very different, and the type of work that they do can range massively, from talking to patients about new trials and things like that in the healthcare setting, through to analyzing product feedback for Zapier. So there's this just massive range of data sets out there, and so we've been thinking, how could we maybe train like an LLM within the context of one customer, so then it's actually a bespoke model for that customer, and then you can start to do interesting things, not just for classification, but also like natural language search, which is like, hey, tell me everything we know about insert extremely specific bespoke feature that's only relevant to your company, and then it comes back with stuff that's relevant. So I want to offer the opportunity for people to ask some questions, because I'm conscious we've got about a few minutes left. But before I do that, I just want to ask one more question of you all, which is kind of with the sort of rise of AI. I think there's a lot of anxiety, obviously, among many roles around, not just lawyers, for example, but other roles. And so I'm interested in what kind of things could we do as researchers to prepare for AI? Is there anything we should be doing right now? Maybe Eniola, I'll start with you, to prepare for it.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of conversation about AI coming in and replacing researchers' jobs, right? And I think we need to recognize it for what it is, right? It's a tool, right, that we can use to do what we've been doing. And there's a reason why UX research takes so many methods and strategies from humanities. Like, I don't see AI anytime soon, at least as I know it now, replacing the human part of research, because an AI can't do empathy well. An AI can't do strategy well, at least not that I've seen, right, on the level that humans can do. So I think one of the things that we can do to prepare for using this tool and applying it to the things that we do as researchers is looking at how we see our data, right? When I look at my tasks as a researcher, I think I would gladly welcome AI to the recruitment process and to the data synthesis process, right? And I think preparing for, our companies allowing us to apply AI to those processes is preparing our data and kind of what we want to track, what metrics we want to look at, and what are the ones that there's an opportunity for AI to help with, right? Because there are some pieces of data or some aspects of the job that AI won't help with, and that's fine because we have other tools and we have really, really smart researchers to do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly seen a lot of excitement in our customer base around the ability for AI to take a lot of the manual work out of their workflows, enabling them to do more things like facilitation and thinking about how stakeholders consume insights and getting the culture sorted out. Sri, I'm curious, like, what's your take on what researchers can do in the next couple of years, I guess, to prepare for AI potentially taking a chunk out of their day?
Yeah, first thing, I think we need to take a deep breath. It's here. I think it's going to stay, right? Does it stay in the shape and form that it is today? Maybe, maybe not. We are seeing the first incarnations, and there's going to be evolution of this, right? I think there's a real opportunity for researchers to embrace AI because I truly believe we can scale, like I was saying earlier, and there's an opportunity for us to provide insights in the moment when the decisions are being made, because we can't be in every meeting. We can't be, working with every engineer or a product manager, right? So I think we need to change our mindset to how can we leverage AI in a way that can help us be present in areas or in situations or contexts that we won't be. So that will be my take. And would it happen a year from now? Would it happen 10 years from now? I can't tell, but it's going to happen. So.
That's great. I'd love to open up to questions from the audience and also online as well, if you want to put them in the chat. Rebecca will raise her hand and repeat them for us. But just firstly, anybody here who has questions for our panel around anything around research or AI? Yes, I might run the mic to you. Yeah, let's do one of these.
Great panel, thank you. I have a question that we didn't really talk about, which is like, how do we see AI changing unmoderated testing? And we talked about, we mentioned Qualtrics, we mentioned usability testing. And so I'm curious, like, what does a supercharged survey with AI look like? Does it become a conversation? Are we voice cloning? Like, how far does it go?
Yeah, so that's you heard me kind of like my gears starting to go. I think that's a really good question. I think that's one of the areas where AI could kind of show up and show out, because like when I think about whether I'm going to do something moderated or unmoderated, I'm like, man, if I do this unmoderated, it has to be so clear, because if there's any type of question, it's not going to get answered. So I think like when we think about research probes or like clarification bots and like allowing people to ask for clarification or kind of get examples or something like that we could program, I think that'd be a really, really cool application for AI. Yeah.
Joe, if you're watching this, don't get mad at me. Joe's the CEO of Maze, but I would encourage you to pay attention to what Maze is releasing in the next couple of, some period of time. Because I think that's a lot of what we get excited about. Like the thing that Maze does really well is we start with the idea that like everyone does research, and the question is like, how do we help them do research really well? And I think that the unmoderated aspect, there's sort of two flavors of it. There's one, which is exactly what you mentioned, of like, if we know that there will be sets of follow-ups, can we build models that reasonably probe, not just the question why, but like take inputs and change them into other things? But I think there's another flavor of this where people do moderated because they've operationalized what they want to be, or they do unmoderated because they've tried to operationalize moderated work and they think they can do it faster. And I think some of the other things that both of you mentioned are like, there's a lot of efficiency gains in certain ways with AI tooling for moderated work. And so I actually think there's going to be a lot, I would imagine people will rebalance how much unmoderated work they are doing because of what that looks like. And I think that we'll start seeing a lot more semi-structured work because you can play in both spaces more effectively.
Another question from online.
Got to do the intro. So from online with the most upvotes, a pretty broad question, but how can UXers start upskilling in AI?
I'm taking notes too.
Sri, maybe we'll go back to you. So how can UXers upskill in AI?
I think one thing that I see that we can do immediately is if you think about the UX process end to end, right? There are a lot of bottlenecks that slows us down. One thing is right now we are struggling with B2B recruiting, right? Where do we find them? There's a lot of recruiting platforms. You go there and it's not enough. So, is there an opportunity if I'm going to make this up, is there an opportunity to recruit participants on chain? When I say on chain, blockchain, right? Because that's where people are playing, and there's no capability that exists today. That we don't know how to do it today, but can AI help, right? So there's going to be many instances, especially in regulated spaces where it's hard to find people, and can we use AI as a tool to be able to help? And again, there's many use cases like that. I think a short way of saying use AI to help you be better researchers. And there are very specific things within the product development cycle that you can do.
I think this is also an opportunity to put UX researchers in the user seat and ask them what are some of the barriers to you using the tools that we have already? So one of my previous managers, one of the first things she told me when I started was that information moves through people rather than a repository or a research library, right? And I've seen that to be true in many of the organizations that I've worked with, even the really big ones. So obviously, there's some kind of preference or, people lean towards, okay, I know who the expert is in this, so I'm going to go ask them. Or people are oh, you have to go talk to Eniola if you're thinking about, this product or this application. So obviously there's opportunity for AI to come in and people have mentioned, have this internal, let me search what we know on this topic, or let me search who else is having this problem besides my user segment. But we have to understand from user researchers kind of what would reduce that friction or that barrier of usage to actually input data into something like that and then go to it to use, right? What would make them trust something like that they're getting the most relevant or most recent data, and what would make it really easy for folks to not take too much time out of their day to go and input what they've learned.
Great. So we've probably got time for one or two more questions. Anybody in the audience here have another question for our panelists? Otherwise, Terry. All right, hang on. We'll grab a mic for you. Take that.
You gotta get the full experience. Yeah, got to get it all. Hey, thanks for speaking. It's been very interesting, so appreciate it. So you've mentioned how AI can speed up your workflow, but also the importance of having that human, kind of connection and stuff. So I'm curious if do you guys have any frameworks that you're using currently that helps you speed up your workflow, but also helps you keep that human element, as well as is that framework that you're using when you're using AI scalable to junior researchers coming through, or researchers who maybe let's say 20 years from now who have a way more understanding or a nuanced understanding of AI than we do currently?
Easy answer.
Shocking, we have Dovetail. One of the things as researchers, and if I look at my own career in the last 15, 20 years, you always go into the field and you learn something new, right? There's no such thing as, okay, I've done that research a year ago, and then, magically I can tell you, what you need to do on that next project, right? So this learning is continuous, and sometimes it's hard to teach. How do you derive patterns, when you do synthesis? So to your point about, can we put some frameworks in place so that, junior researchers coming, or somebody who's more green coming in, can you teach them so that, you and as a junior and then a senior researcher are arriving at exactly same set of insights, right? I think it's not easy. It's challenging. Is it teachable? Yes. Can we use AI as a way to automate or, teach AI to be that, to be that generating insights as a senior or a seasoned researcher. Right now, I don't see a framework. Some of it is, are in science, right? And some of it is science, so you can use formulaic and frameworks, and some of it is a lot of pattern recognition and connecting the dots and going back to, work that we've done in the past and bringing that, into the context, right? I believe and hope that, we can bring some consistency with frameworks, but a lot of it is also is in the making. And some of it is the magic sauce that you've kind of gathered over a period of time that you leverage. If anybody has any other thoughts?
One provocation I like to use with folks who are early in their career is like, if you couldn't actually do primary research tomorrow, how would you keep your job? Like, how would you still be effective, right? What are the, because I think it's, how do you get to the underlying skills that make you impactful as a researcher? And then like those skills obviously get expressed in a bunch of different ways. So I think there's a similar provocation around, like, if you had to use AI in your work, what would it be good for? And one lens is, given the research process today, where would I use it? The other one is, given what AI can do, how might research look different? And I think the thing that hopefully people decades from now will have figured out is like where the humans are most valuable and where the systems are most valuable. I think for me, a lot of the frameworks around AI are sort of, especially like narrow AI intelligence, is just like brute forcing a thing. Right? It's like, talked about having like lab assistants. It's like, if I had 100 people helping me, what would they do? And those things are all very known, very codified. To Sri's point, it's like, yes, I could tell someone that the questions I ask are like, what, so what, and now what? But like, we're not going to look at the same things and come up with the same answers yet. So I probably am still doing some of that. But there are things that I know to look for that I can pass off to other systems. And I think we will continue to get better at that as we play more. And so I think the provocation that came from online is like, the answer is just play, like start playing and develop a perspective of what does work and what doesn't work, because all of this is changing very quickly. And the more active we are in playing with it rather than just theorizing about it, like this is the same thing we tell everyone we work with, right? Stop just like sitting around a room and talking, like go talk to people, go see it firsthand, like do more of that. I think that's going to help all of us have a stronger perspective too, and then hopefully build better reinforcement into the models and the tools.
Yeah, awesome. I've got one more question online. Rebecca.
Awesome. So how will generative AI change the way that researchers work?
Let's go to Sri. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
You were looking very like, I want to pass this one off.
I love this. I love the attention. How? It looks like there's a specific answer that somebody's looking for. I'm going to give broad strokes. I think it's going to change how we're going to do work. I think that's going to happen. Where and do we have the tools now, or would we get tools in the future? I mean, it's TBD, right? Like my perspective has always been, anytime there is a new technology. I mean, when Excel came about, when we as humans started to think about and use it in ways that we have not done work before or used those processes before. So very similar things are going to happen. I think we all will learn and adapt. We'll all will find ways to build use cases on top of it and then make us more efficient, for lack of a better term. And what exactly that's going to be, it's hard to tell, because if I knew, I would have built those tools now. I just don't know that just yet.
I mean, I don't think I'll speak on behalf of researchers because I wouldn't know exactly what I'm talking about. But I do think, like, to your point, it's, if you're spending time doing kind of grunt work, the brute force work it's like, it really feels trivial to an extent, which is like, we're better editors than we are writers. And so getting a head start is like amazing. I think that's like really, really important. So to the point of just like getting out there and playing is like, I don't know, set ChatGPT as your home screen and try to use it every day and just try to get better at it. I think that's like really good. And then I think everyone here that comes after work to learn something is like so primed to be awesome with generative AI. because you're just like keen to learn. And there's like this whole new thing to learn that could be really transformative. And I think that's really valuable right now. And so like, if you start using it, you'll be the ones I think that are changing it versus it changing like the way that you work in the end.
Yeah, I think this is also a little bit of a moment in time. Like I lost my shit the first time I used Zapier. Like pass in Zendesk ticket that has this word to a Slack channel. Like that used to take me hours. I would spend time every day going through Zendesk reading. And now I'm just like, you can do all the plumbing for me. This is amazing, right? And I think we also forget, like, not that long ago, prototyping was really difficult. Right? Like working with engineers to get a prototype built so you could test something. Now we can spin up prototypes basically on our own by clicking through Figma. It takes no time at all, right? And so I think it's easy to look at this and be like, wow, shiny, new, wild. But I think we will probably get better very quickly, and these things will change in ways that we're going to look back at this and be like, what were we thinking that was 1% of what's possible.
So like you said, I think generative AI will grow and develop and innovate like it does, right? Like anything does over time. But something that I think about is like PHI or sensitive data, or like, where's our data going and how is it being kept? And to our users whose data we're holding, we have to update them about what we're doing with their data. And so I think depending on like, what kind of data you're working with, what kind of users you're working with, what kind of company you're at, like we'll see different applications of AI, and maybe we'll see later applications of AI because you kind of have to vet and understand what does the privacy and security of these tools look like. And I think we'll see a lot of companies build, internal AI tools and trust those before kind of these larger scale ChatGPT tools.
Yeah, that's certainly a consideration that we have at Dovetail. Obviously, we can't go and plug ChatGPT into the product, make a lot of customers unhappy with what we're doing with their data. So I'm going to wrap up.
Sydney had one question.
One question from Sydney. Really? We have our team in Sydney also watching. It's it's like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Yeah, so this is from one of our researchers, Anahita, and she would love to know how, I think we touched on this a bit earlier with Behzod about the democratization of research trend, and how do we think that AI affects that? Does that sort of accelerate that or not? Maybe I'll hand back to Behzod because we touched on it before about PMs and designers doing more research and researchers being sort of facilitators. Does AI make that more of a thing or less of a thing?
I think that I operate from the premise that like everyone does research, and some people do it better, and some people are trained in it, and some people are more practiced. And I think that we're getting better and better tools, and also better and better free information and training and events, so that people can be more competent and confident in what they're doing. My concern with AI when it comes to things we talk about when we talk about democratization is that the gap between, or the difference between a good survey that AI has worked on and a bad survey that AI has worked on are almost indistinguishable. Like I can use ChatGPT and it's great because I'm a trained researcher, and someone else can use ChatGPT and it's garbage because they don't know what to look for. And I think the danger there is that, again, like 1,000 things will bloom, and my hope is that people are less concerned that it's happening and more thinking about how to partner to prevent the bad things from happening.
How good. So I think we have to wrap up. Obviously, yeah, very big topic. Seems like we have a lot of uncertainty ahead of us, fraught with risks, uncharted waters, but a huge opportunity as well if you have the right sort of curiosity mindset. I want to thank all of our panelists today for coming along. And also a big thanks to Nick and Rebecca from Maze who have helped us put this event on. And as well, Shelby and Daniela from our team here at Dovetail. And if you want to check out Maze, head to maze.co. It's a continuous product discovery platform, usability testing, moderated, unmoderated, and surveying. And then, of course, you can put that data in Dovetail at dovetail.com if you like, which is a customer insight platform for collaboration, research repository, and so forth. So We just launched an integration as well most recently. So yeah, I'd love to bring this kind of event to everybody. So thanks so much for coming along. Those in person as well. If you traveled far, thank you so much.
I have to.